Good morning. I hope everyone's having a lovely morning. My name is Regina Kim, and I'm currently a senior at Walden High School. I enjoy creating art, talking about my obese cat, and placing myself in difficult situations. Since quarantine, I know many of us had to adjust our lifestyles equivalent to that of a hermit, or if you're like me, there wasn't much adjusting at all. Now, moving on today, I'm here to talk about my experiences with unusual environments and how I adapt to them. Basically, how I learned to adapt to any new situation. Through these experiences, I am now confidently able to say I can adapt to pretty much any odd situation, which feels a little arrogant to say, but it's true. So before we dive into it, let me provide some context. For my specific scenario, I'll be talking about my time overseas and how I entered a public high school in Korea. I emphasized public school as I could not speak Korean at the time, and I only knew how to speak English. As a born and raised American, this new environment contrasted in culture, food, people, and most importantly, language. And as any dumb middle schooler or high schooler, I did not prepare myself for this massive change. In fact, it had not occurred to me that this would be a life-changing experience until my first day of school. I stood in front of 28 other students that looked just like me, and I remember hearing my teacher ask me to introduce myself to the class, and how I stood in front of the chalkboard, staring back in shock. I couldn't even say my name. I couldn't even say, "Hi, my name is Regina Kim, and I'm the new foreign student." My first initial response to this large change was fear. I was afraid of getting to know my surroundings and reaching out to people. The most socializing I could do at the time was hello and goodbye. However, the most painful part of this experience was my initial attitude towards the situation. I refused to adapt to my situation, and so the painfully long process of adjustment came along. It took me an entire year to convince myself that I wasn't rejecting my home, my origin, my friends, and everything I was learned in the US. It took me a year to understand that instead of being placed in an unhealthy or hostile environment, I was given the opportunity to learn of my ethnic home. Now that we've set the foundation, let's move on to my actual process of how I adapt to any situation. Based on my experiences, I've decided to categorize my methods of adaptability into two categories. The first labeled as how to respond to push. The second is how to respond to pull. Push is when you've created an environment where you feel uncomfortable, where it be created by accident or intentionally. It's almost always a learning opportunity. Some examples are events such as this one, accidents, or consequences of certain actions. To simplify it even further, there are situations you've created, regardless of whether it were intentional or not. How you respond to these situations is often fixed by listening to your environment. If you're able to comprehend the situation you created, you'll be able to empathize better, which is a key solution in adaptability. Pull is when you've been placed in an environment where you feel uncomfortable. A better explanation would be an unavoidable situation, such as suddenly getting sick, starting school in a new location, or moving on to the next school year. To better explain, these are situations that could occur at any moment and are usually unavoidable. These situations are usually action-required scenarios. They often call for your attention and need some sort of physical response. So how did I apply push and pull? Well, I recognized that I was placed in a situation, meaning a pull, and although at first I didn't think this way, I later learned that I should manipulate the situation to my favor. First, feel uncomfortable. Adapting in the beginning is usually a very slow and embarrassing process where you learn how to humiliate yourself. Like speaking in front of class, moving into a new location, or 30 minutes before your speech. These are our more common experiences of exposure, but they generally provide us with our very first reaction or response. In my case, I was suddenly exposed to another country's education system, and in response to my lack of preparation and fear, I viewed the situation as negative. Second, set a positive perspective on your situation. This does not have to be established immediately, but is more beneficial when established right away. As mentioned previously, I had a negative outlook on the move, as I put zero effort into improving my situation, my grades, my social life, or anything I really cared for. It was obvious that it could only deteriorate because I chose not to participate in any school events, community service, competitions, club activities, or just general socializing. I was preventing myself from adapting, and instead, I used my time in the comforts of my room, enjoying the small habits I carried over from the US, like binging shows, reading a book, or lots of solo activities, which isn't to say they're a bad thing, just not the right time. After I chose to have a positive outlook, I began to create meaningful bonds with people. I had a lot more fun in school, participating in nearly every single school event. I started my own club, ironically, a language club, and I would often volunteer for community service with friends. Moving to my third step, be prepared for failure and criticism. Before I began adapting, I learned to accept failure. As someone that often overanalyzes a situation, I've grown to be terrified of failure, and the anxiety from it was often the motivation behind most of my schoolwork. However, the most challenging part of adapting to any situation is from the lack of empathy. During this growth period, many people will ignore you or simplify your problems for you. Do not minimize your problems and properly express yourself. One of my more concerning issues at the time was my frustration with the language. I couldn't properly express myself the way I wanted. And in the moments I did, it usually wasn't explained correctly. And when I felt most vulnerable, there was nothing more frustrating than being told, oh, I had it worse, or it seems hard now, but it'll get better later. It felt as if my current conflict was completely irrelevant. And that made me feel terrible because it made me feel like I didn't matter at all. The truth is, this applies even more as a student or when you're younger. You're automatically looked down upon because of your age, and realistically, many adults will brush you off. However, don't feel too discouraged by this. Instead, use it as an opportunity to reach out to other students or people that have similar experiences with you. Fourth, socialize, socialize, socialize. The most important activity that allowed me to adapt quicker was socializing. When you socialize, you are learning directly from the residents and the environment. It is the most effective method and most memorable. I remember I used to purchase from this very tiny bakery located in the corner of my neighborhood. The owner, as well as baker, made amazing milk bread, the type you buy at Asian grocery stores. He also made several other treats that were mouth-wateringly good. Obviously, my mom and I became his regulars. We came by so often, he'd give us free desserts. I remember he had his sister working for him. She would handle the register, and on the register, you could see a decently large sign that read, "Please speak clearly. I am deaf. I am able to read your lips. Please don't mumble." I'm not sure why I remember this so well, but I felt so comforted in that moment, knowing that there was another person that had to adjust to each customer. The same way I had to adjust to each person in each unique scenario. To better summarize, the way you adjust to a situation is how you perceive that situation. Be patient with any assumptions you make, as assumptions are almost always negative. Socialize with people you want to socialize. Choose your friends, and hopefully they'll help you adapt to other situations as quickly as I had to. Thank you for listening.